Traitors must die!
Hello, friends. So, to start out this episode, I'd like to talk about the music of Robotech, because, oh my goodness, is the soundtrack for this show just simply glorious. If you want to watch the show for nothing else, you should check it out for the music alone. Here's 4 different tracks. I defy anybody who has already seen this show not to get nostalgic hearing just part of that. Alright, let's try and tackle the next 3 episodes of Robotech. So yeah, just to recap, when the SDF-1 tried to space fold away, it accidentally took Macross Island as well as some of the surrounding ocean along with it. Unsurprisingly, pretty much anybody with official lines of communication are now calling SDF-1 going, "What just happened?" And we get one of the most amazing understated moments from Global in the entire show.
Captain, I can't seem to raise either the Daedalus or
Nothing
the
on
Prometheus.
any channel.
It doesn't look good.
I see. That's bad.
This man greets massive catastrophe with, that's bad. What a man. Meanwhile, we cut over to Rick and Min-Mei, who have managed to find themselves stranded in the bowels of the giant space fortress. Rick's radio's broken, so they can't even call for help, so they're basically stranded on a desert island while being surrounded by people. So, about 2/3 of the episode is dedicated to Rick and Min-Mei's story. And what I'm going to do, just to make the review a little easier, is I'm going to focus on all of the plot-relevant stuff I find interesting, and then we'll get over to the Rick and Min-Mei section of the story. So Roy is requesting leave to go try and find Rick, even though they're in the midst of a massive emergency trying to salvage everything and evacuate the civilians from the bunkers back over to SDF-1. Global finally has to step in.
Commander Fokker, Gloval, your request is denied. I'm sorry to hear about your friend, but we have over 70,000 civilian survivors on board this ship now, and we need all our officers on duty to ensure their safety.
Aye, aye, Captain, whatever you say. I'm sure that 70,000 civilians are a whole lot more important than my friend. Over and out, sir.
We are here to convene the court-martial of Roy Fokker. Roy Fokker, you stand accused of dereliction of duty, disrespecting a superior officer, and not respecting the mandates of your duty station. How do you plead?
Your Honor, we plead not guilty by reason of the fact that my client is an idiot, and I can prove that because he hired me as his lawyer. Over the course of several days, they're able to salvage most of the city, including the 2 aircraft carriers that were parked offshore, and have also managed to evacuate most of the civilians aboard SDF-1. Unfortunately, they're not able to really call for any sort of help, not only being far outside of the realm of anything that humanity is really extended to, but not helped by the fact that if they use any of the primary communication network, that could give the Zentradi valuable information that they don't want to reveal to them. A few more days have passed, and not only have they managed to restore the situation to a modicum of control, but with the help of the civilian population, the military has attempted to rebuild Macross City inside of SDF-1 as a way to store all of the supplies that they've obtained from the Shattered Island. I mean, not a terrible plan, but I feel like there probably were easier solutions. So we find out part of the reason that Rick and Min-Mei are having such a hard time getting out of their predicament is the fact that they're in a part of the ship that apparently hasn't been modified for normal human usage, since large portions of the ship they're in seem to have been built for the Zentradi proportions, even though the labels are in English. Yeah, that just seems weird. Eventually they're able to find water, even if it does involve Rick being slightly pervy at the underage girl's expense.
Oh, I think I'm going to take a shower.
Did you say a shower?
Sure.
Yeah! Don't worry, Min-Mei.
Thought I saw something.
Just your imagination?
Sure.
Though Rick's bouts of being utterly creepy somehow don't stop Min-Mei for developing some sort of attraction to him. At some point, Rick decides to try and use the airlock to get to a higher level of the spaceship and hopefully find somebody's attention, even if this probably means he's going to suffocate since he's only got an improvised spacesuit.
How are you going to breathe?
I'll just have to hold my breath for a little while.
Then won't you suffocate?
I'm telling you, it'll be just like diving in the ocean.
Wait a minute, I'm having second thoughts.
Don't worry, Min-Mei, we're all having second thoughts about letting Rick be the primary protagonist. Somewhere along the way, they end up finding a window and notice a giant freaking tuna fish. So Rick's plan instead becomes to get the tuna fish inside so they can have plenty of food to prevent them from starving. That goes about as well as you might think, causing him to rip his spacesuit, thus preventing any future spacewalks, only really being able to salvage the fish's head. As the two of them talk, we find out that Min-Mei actually went back to her room to try and retrieve a letter, which would reveal if she had made it into the Miss Macross competition. Something like Miss America, I guess. As the situation continues to remain grim, Min-Mei ends up giving into depression and asks Rick to marry her in a fake wedding ceremony since she's unlikely to ever get a real one, seeing as they've been trapped down here for weeks and they seem no closer to being rescued by anyone. Right before Rick can kiss the emotionally vulnerable and underage girl, somebody ends up dropping a heavy piece of machinery out of nowhere, destroying Rick's plane but fortunately allowing them to be rescued. The two are shocked to discover that even Min-Mei's family Chinese restaurant has survived intact. Unfortunately, her little brother has also survived intact for some reason. Because Rick's moral character is that of a Victorian ingenue, he's knocked unconscious by being slapped on the back, rounding out our episode. Okay, yes, it's emotional frustration and exhaustion, but still, I like thinking that Rick is really just too weak and pathetic to be the main character.
You are commanded to stay tuned for the return of Robotech.
In episode 5, we see that, yeah, they really are going about rebuilding the space station. In fact, Min-Mei's family is attempting to reopen their Chinese restaurant, being able to brag it's the first Chinese restaurant in outer space. Admittedly, a decent way of raising morale among the civilian and military population. While talking to some of their first customers, Min-Mei reveals the fact that Rick is staying in a family spare bedroom upstairs. They make inferences about the nature of their relationship after being trapped down below so long, since that's been the talk of the town, but she reveals that at this point they are just friends. A fact that Rick overhears and has this little emotional outburst over.
So, we're just friends, huh?
We're going to be marooned here until we die, so please hold me, Rick. Please hold me tight.
After everything that happened, the very next day, we're just friends?
Okay, friends. I'm right here with you. I swear his character does get worse by the end of this episode, but it gets a lot better after that, so please try and stay with me. We'll get through this on the other side, I promise. Over with Commander Global, it seems that when the Spacefold system, teleported itself out of reality, it ended up leaving a huge section of conduit missing, so they now can't actually fire the main gun, since it was kind of integral to allowing the energy exchange to pass through that particular room. However, since the SDF-1's components are somewhat modular, there's a theory that they could reconfigure the SDF-1 to make up the difference between the two rooms. Apparently they don't have an extension cord long enough. Not helped by the fact that being able to rearrange the spaceship like that would probably re-destroy the city all over again. Something Global's a little hesitant to do since everybody's only just kind of gotten used to things being vaguely normal. Rick continues to sulk and pretend that it's only about his plane, when obviously he's a pouting man-child who doesn't understand that he's not entitled to a girl's affections, but that's beside the point. Roy Fokker comes along to try and cheer up Rick over the state of his plane, revealing that he's aware that Rick is unhappy, and that also Min-Mei is far too good a person since she's the one who asked him to try and cheer up Rick, even while Rick is being a selfish, arrogant little schnot. But anyway, Roy also takes Rick to one side and offers him the chance to join the military, so that Rick will hopefully stop pouting. It turns out they've managed to attach the two aircraft carriers to the sides of SDF-1, giving them an easy way to take off and land. We also learn they're able to fly in the vacuum of space because apparently their engines are built on nuclear reactors, and that somehow justifies how they're able to fly in space. I'm not even going to get into it right now. I've got much better things to do. Back over with Britai and the Zentradi, they're reviewing footage of the battle taken from Macross Island while they wait to figure out where SDF-1 went. In the reviewing of that footage, they notice that the humans are Micronians. A fact the two find utterly distressing, especially since there's an old legend in their archives saying that any planet occupied by Micronians should be left alone, since they're far too dangerous to interact with. I'm not entirely sure how things that are about the size of a pencil to you are that threatening, but okay, fine. However, at this point, the Zentradi are aware of where SDF-1 is, and they execute a hyperspace fold to arrive outside the orbit of Pluto as well. Rick ends up going to see Min-Mei to try and make up for being such a colossal ass earlier. During the conversation, she reveals that she actually got a chance to read that letter, and she's actually been accepted into the Miss Macross competition, which has always been a huge dream of hers. Meanwhile, Rick is continuing to be super angsty. Up on the bridge, it's obvious that the Zentradi have found them and they're moving in for the attack. They're going to have to try and defend themselves, which is going to be tricky without the use of their main gun, which they still can't use unless they transform. Ha ha ha. While they put the aircraft carriers to good use launching all of their planes, Rick and Min-Mei go for a walk in the park. Rick continuing to angst about the fact that he misses the good old days, where they were trapped alone below where everything made sense, and not where he was in a position to join the military. Oh, thank goodness, we finally get a battle scene to distract us from Rick's angsting. But yeah, the battle outside of the spaceship is not going well, and it's becoming clear their only hope really is to execute the bizarre fold maneuver to be able to utilize their main guns to fend off the Zentradi attack. One of Sun Tzu's lesser-known rules from The Art of War. So it's time to hang on to something and hope this actually works, otherwise the whole ship is probably gonna blow up. Rick continues to be melodramatic, lamenting he can't join the military because he'd probably get himself blown up just like everybody else who goes out to fight.
Rick, how can you say that? All the soldiers who come to our restaurant are in exactly the same position.
Oh yeah? The same position? You'd be the one to know now, wouldn't you?
And that, friends, that was the moment that Min-Mei realized Rick was not worth ever dating. Ever. As if being slapped by a giant Klubai 4 from God, the ground ends up splitting open and Min-Mei nearly plummets to her death as the ship begins its modular reconfiguration. Which, incidentally, I repeatedly want to play the Ultron transformation theme song over this scene, but yeah, it's pretty cool, even if the end result is kind of silly, let's be honest. Fortunately, they're able to use the main gun to drive back the bulk of the Zentradi fleet and cause them to reconsider the wisdom of this particular plan. However, the aftermath of this particular maneuver is about the same as if the city had been hit by an earthquake. Seeing the wanton, rampant destruction that his careless wish that everything would just go back to the way it was, Rick realizes that maybe he should stop being quite so fatalistic and ends up deciding to join the military, rounding out our 5th episode of the series.
You are commanded to stay tuned for the return of Robotech.
Fortunately, by episode 6, they've managed to rebuild all of the damage from the minor earthquake they experienced when the spaceship transformed. Also, Rick has managed to conclude his basic training, so he's fully certified to join the military and fly combat. He also manages to net himself a fancy uniform. On his first day off, he decides to go clothes shopping with Min-Mei, which leads to an embarrassing incident where he ends up being mistaken for a lecture by several of the bridge officers, including Lisa Hayes. Needless to say, not a great way to start off your working relationship with your bridge officers. And it seems the hyperspace fold system is the gift that keeps on giving, since it's left behind a tangible energy field which, with a little bit of conversion, could possibly be used as some sort of an energy shield for the SDF-1. Now, it's not big enough to cover the whole spaceship, but they could use it as a pinpoint defense system. Meanwhile, Britai and Exeter are still trying to figure out why exactly the SDF-1 decided to look even more ridiculous. If it serves some sort of tactical function or if they're really just messing with them. However, it also seems that they're attempting to either hide within the rings or behind Saturn as they continue their attempt to return to Earth. Britai recognizes this is a setup for an ambush, but decides to ambush the ambushers. Roy takes Rick for a walk around the base trying to dispense some brotherly advice when they end up running into Lisa Hayes and the other bridge officers. Unfortunately, now Lisa manages to recognize Rick as the one that disrespected her before, and she makes it clear to Rick that she's not going to put up with any of his sass now that he's in the military and she's his boss. Huh, Rick, I guess it's almost like there are consequences to your actions or something. Well, the battle fortress has finally made it to the rings of Saturn, and one of the drill sergeant informs the new recruits that they're going to be going into the line of fire, and gives them one of the weirdest speeches I've ever heard.
We'll all receive your orders tomorrow. But until then, I want you to think of just one thing. Robotech.
I'm not entirely sure how that's supposed to be encouraging to them, but okay. He also tells them there's a very real chance they may not come home, so they should all see anyone they care about that night. So, of course, Rick ends up meeting with Min-Mei in the park. He can't really bring himself to tell her the fact that he's gonna probably die the next day, but finds an opportunity to take a photo in front of the fountain with her to try and make sure there's something to remember him by if he doesn't come back, and possibly to give him something to fight for. In one of the very few instances of obviously not predicting trends, apparently coin-operated robot cameras were the logical way that we would be taking photos in the future, not with, say, our phones or something, but I love it anyway. In a really nice character moment, Roy goes to check up on Rick, assuming he's probably not asleep even though it's almost midnight, remembering those early night jitters before your first active combat. I kind of love the fact that it's clear he really does care about Rick, and it also helps humanize Rick, realizing how terrified he must be before going into battle for the first time on the next day. Speaking of which, there is a lot of this episode dedicating to the setup before the Blitzkrieg operation, so I'm really gonna just stick to some of the only really important highlights. The big one is Rick remarking on how crazy the other pilots must be flying through the rings of Saturn while he's staying up above them where it's safe, only for him to be chastised by Lisa Hayes for being out of position and pointing out the reason they're flying through the asteroid belt is to help disguise their presence so that they're not spotted on radar immediately. For all that I kind of enjoy watching Rick get chewed out, I still gotta feel a little bad for the poor guy. And we see the SDF-1 getting ready to spring the trap on the Zentradi. As they commence the attack, the Zentradi are utterly confused, since they're just sending out weak fighters against motherships. It's like a mouse trying to take down a cat. It's completely stupid. However, if the mouse is trying to distract the cat long enough for the dog to get the drop on him, that's different. Britai orders the Zentradi again to try and avoid damaging the battle fortress. SDF-1 prepares to take the kill shot, but it seems that unfortunately they're having a little bit of a performance issue with the main gun. Hey, it happens to every guy at least once. Fortunately, this is a good excuse to test out the new pinpoint defense laser system they made with that energy barrier mentioned earlier in the episode. And I gotta say, I like the idea of this in principle, but the idea that 3 people using basically a rotary mouse are going to somehow be able to accurately predict where missiles and lasers are going to hit the SDF-1 is a little bit of a hard sell, I'm sorry. But lacking the duct tape necessary to fix the main gun, they're now sitting ducks, and this has gone from being a trap to an all-out slaughter. Fortunately, Lisa comes up with a clever plan, ordering them to move all of the rocket batteries to the front of the battleship Daedalus. Once that's complete, they put the pinpoint barriers at the front of the Daedalus and proceed to Falcon Punch the front of the Zentradi ship. Then, once it's deep inside the Zentradi ship, it fires off all of the rockets, completely destroying it in one salvo. I gotta say, that's an interesting strategy and pretty awesome. After having displayed a completely original strategy, Britai decides that maybe they need a call for reinforcements. And that's basically where we end the episode. So, as I was working on these 3 episodes, I kind of realized that maybe the reason Rick Hunter was written so irredeemably and frustrating throughout most of it was actually a form of character development. After all, there are some really good stories written about characters that are mostly irredeemable for the first part. Shazam is actually a great example. Even if I wasn't terribly thrilled with the depiction of Billy Batson, I do have to say it gave him a good character arc, going from an average kid who develops superpowers and maybe doesn't use them very well, to having to actually be a hero. Likewise, we see Rick acting like a self-entitled jerk, who is probably what most teenage boys act like, even if that's not necessarily a good thing. Which only gets worse after they're rescued and his self-entitled feelings aren't reciprocated by Min-Mei. But after he ends up joining the military, he does a good bit of growing up once he's confronted with the consequences for his actions, and is actually forcing himself to be dedicated to something other than his own amusement, which was pretty much what his character was all about to begin with. And he still is no Rambo. He managed to crash aboard a Zentradi ship completely by accident during the battle, and wound up getting the drop on a Zentradi, who he couldn't bring himself to shoot because he was just as scared as the other guy. And if not for the explosion when the Daedalus fired inside the ship and conveniently finding an escape, he probably would be dead. So again, I think that was what they were trying to do here, and I give them full props for going that big. But just as a note to future writers, be very careful, because the payoff to this kind of a character arc can be great, but if mishandled, your audience will not stick around long enough to see your payoff once they actually change character. It's also in episode 6 that I'm really glad to see Lisa's character getting a little bit more development. Up until this point, she's mostly just served as the communications officer for SDF-1 as far as I can tell, so it's kind of cool having her show some leadership potential and actually coming up with a strategy that saves the day. I also like in this episode we do get a little bit of an answer as to why the Zentradi haven't just blown up SDF-1 already, since they're under strict orders to try and take it intact, which means that even though they drastically outnumber them, they're forced to hold most of their power back in fear of actually destroying their target. And that sets up a good mystery as to why it is they're so desperate to take it intact. Oi! Aren't you gonna talk about the giant fish? What was up with that? Please don't make me have to talk about the giant space fish. Oh, but you see right here in the Internet Reviewer's Guide, it says you have to talk about any weird stuff in an episode that's a little bit nitpicky. Alright, look friends, I'm gonna level with you. I don't know why there's a giant space fish. It's not explained at any point in the episode. My only guess is this is somehow tied into the original Japanese version of the anime. And before you ask, no, I'm not going to watch it to fact check it because I'm a dyslexic cosplayer. I don't do subtitles. I'm sorry. Well, that's episodes 4 to 6 down. What can you expect from the next 3 episodes? Well, the single greatest villain of the entire series finally shows up. Rick makes some new friends. And we also get to see Miss Min-Mei in the Miss Macross contest. I hope to see you then. Until next time, see ya!
Glory to the Zentradi! My name is Commander Britai, and if you wish to show your support for this series, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to Dyslexic Cosplayer. Also consider checking out his Patreon. Though our culture does not understand the idea of art or creativity, we find it most fascinating. All requisite tactical links will be found in the description below.